Hello everyone, welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope you're doing well. So there's a bit of a running joke on my channel about how I refer to Radagon as Marika's pet science project. And it's partially a joke, but I also kind of think it's the truth. I mean, I truly think that she experimented and created this homunculus artificial god thing, or excuse me, lord. And now I guess a quick recap on Radagon is in order. We are blatantly told in the game that Radagon and Marika are the same person, but we're also given several examples of Marika literally talking to Radagon as if he were someone else, or at the very least a different aspect of maybe her own being. But all we really know about the guy is told to us through item descriptions or through characters like Muriel the Turtle Pope. Despite all his impact, he isn't really mentioned directly by a lot of the surviving characters. So real quick, I'm going to try to go over everything I know about Rads Rickelson, and if I miss anything, I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments. He allegedly fought in Marika's conquest against the Giants, explaining his hatred of their red hair, supposedly. More on that later. He was also tasked with conquering Liurnia, the land of sorcerers and astrology. He was beaten back or fought to a stalemate twice by the Lunar Queen Renala, and the two of them eventually put aside their differences, got married, and had some kids. And interestingly enough, their kids were arguably the strongest out of all the demigods. Again, I said arguably. Now, once he was married to Queen Renala, he proposed several changes to the Carian royal family's way of life, including but not restricted to forcing the preceptors to wear these goofy masks that indicated to all that their businesses were strictly private because they served the royal family of Caria and all that. Which seems, to me at least, to be evidence that Radagon had at least something to hide. Maybe a secret identity, or the fact that he wasn't real? Eventually, though, Radagon was recalled back to Leyndell. There, Marika married him, making him the second Elden Lord after she sent Godfrey on his way to go die out in the Badlands to become stronger. Radagon abandoning Renala also had its side effects as well. It looks as though somehow her connection to the full moon has been severed, which could be Radagon's doing, or she could have just lost her will, but either way, the Academy Lords have lost faith with her because of this. And they soon start to rebel, causing a civil war between the Carian royal family and the entire Academy of Rey Lucaria. But Radagon wasn't thinking about any of that, he just headed back home to Leyndell. They then had two kids together who we'll get into their creation a little bit later in the video. But they're two of the more afflicted demigods that we come across in the game. Mikola, who's in a weird slumbery cocoon form that has been maybe violated by the Formless Mother or her agent Mog. And let's not forget about his other spawn, the severed harpy Melina, who is more than content just to hang around the Halig tree and wait for her brother to come home all on his own, even though he doesn't appear very capable of that right now. Anyway, though, during his time as Elden Lord, Radagon used a bunch of the shit he learned during his time with the Carians to create a bunch of new incantations that combined Golden Order magic with Carian sorcery, which is a bit similar to what his son Rykard did with the volcano hexes of Mount Gelmir, turning the ancient obscure magic of the volcano into modern-day sorceries. Radagon would also close down all of the Colosseums that are dotted throughout the lands between, essentially putting a bunch of duelists and mad pumpkinheads out of a job, although they do appear to have found work as grave tenders and mercenaries. No one knows why Rykard did this as far as I know, but I guess he just wasn't a fan of having fun. The last event that I can think of that links to Radagon is the Shattering itself. See, after the Night of Black Knives, for whatever reason, Marika felt it necessary to shatter the Elden Ring. Radagon, being the lapdog of the Golden Order that he is, attempted to repair it. It's presumably this paradox of events that leads to them both being trapped within the Erd Tree, at least until we come along. And since that was such an unnecessarily long recap of events, let's have our intro, shall we? Now, I do think, though, that Radagon started out as one of her alter egos. For example, I can't really find much characterization on Radagon's part, so I'm led to believe that it was Marika who disguised herself as him and then infiltrated the Carians, married Renala, even had kids with Renala, then, learned everything she could from the Carians and dipped out, and it was supposedly under the cover of Radagon being recalled to Marika after she sent Godfrey away. And then she surprisingly made Radagon Elden Lord to the surprise of pretty much everybody, especially our dear Turtle Pope Muriel. Since Radagon was viewed as just a mere champion of Marika's and nothing more, not really fit to be the consort of the goddess herself, It looked sus to basically everybody. Now let's get to the meat and potatoes. How did Marika theoretically create Radagon after, using him as an alter ego for presumably years at this point? Well, look no further than the Mimic Tears. One of the Nox's many attempts to craft a lord of their own. One of these things can easily be an effective ally, as it's known to fight alongside its summoner in the case of the Spirit Ashes, while also taking their form and now possessing a multitude of their abilities. However, this mimicry does not extend to imitating the summoner's will, quite bluntly stating that these Mimic Tears have wills of their own goals, their own purposes, their own belief systems. Now, I don't think mimicking a god would be that simple, really. I mean, I guess getting the appearance wouldn't be hard, but the rest of it probably would, like mimicking the abilities of a god. Now, you might also be wondering by this point, where did Marika get knowledge of the Nox's experiments with Silver Tears and Mimic Tears and trying to craft a lord and all of that? Well, I can't seem to prove it, but the Nox appear to be some type of distant descendant or maybe relative race of the Newman. Marika is referred to as a Newman woman, and so are all of the Black Knife assassins, and you the player can start off as one too. Now, it's important to note that these women were also referred to as the scions of the Eternal Cities. So perhaps the Newmen were who led the Nox, like maybe it was their nobility. So that alone would connect Marika to the infamous Silver Tears and the experiments of the Nox, especially their attempts to craft a lord. I mean, it sounds a lot like what I'm alleging that she's attempting to do, or successfully did, rather. Now, I suppose we could also say that maybe Marika knew nothing about what the Nox were doing and had no knowledge of their experiments prior to, the events of the game. But then again, if she was the one who disguised herself as Radagon and seduced Rennala, she would be the one who learned a bunch of, basically, homunculus science project knowledge, and presumably would be able to craft her own lord, since she had all the ingredients on hand. Personally, I think it can go either way. I think it's also very possible that Marika could have already created Radagon by this point. With all her knowledge of Nox science and whatnot, maybe she didn't even need the Carians for that. I think it's more likely she needed the Carians to create Ranni. But I guess then the question is whether or not a Silver Tear could father a child, That tends to be why I think that Radagon was not yet a science project when he seduced Rennala, and at that time just a alter ego of hers. Again, since we know so little about her goals and just how much she knew and what she didn't know, it all becomes just blatant, like me theory crafting out of what very little threads were given. Even though Marika, of all people, has the most threads, we still don't know what she was trying to do. You know what I mean? We don't really know what her goal was. Now, again, this is a pretty crackpot theory video. I'm not saying any of this shit should be taken, with fact. This is just me speculating. So yeah, the Mimic Tear is probably the main ingredient of what Radagon is made up of. But let's assume for the moment that with the right mixture of ingredients that a god's power could be mimicked. Now, what would Marika have her hands on or have access to that would be something similar to a piece of a fallen god or something like that? Well, she has access to the last fire giant, which happens to house this mysterious fell god who may or may not be an outer god, but we know he's a god of some kind. And we're told that Marika was supposedly unable to destroy this being, so she sealed him in the last giant, basically to stay up in the mountains for eternity and tend the ruin flame and whatnot. Now, whether or not Marika was actually capable of killing the fell god or not is sort of irrelevant, but maybe she needed him alive for her little science project to work. Maybe using a piece of a dead god was no good, it didn't work in her experiment to create a replica of herself. And maybe to truly mimic a god, you need a piece of a living god. In this case, a small portion of the Flame of Ruin itself. Or perhaps it wasn't the fire at all. Maybe it was just a chunk of the giant's leg, and that's why he's got a bum leg. Maybe she even threw some pieces of a Zamornite into the mix because, their natural frost affinity would balance out the infamous Flame of the Fell God, which could explain why that random Zamornite imprisoned in the Everjail has Radagon's scar seal. Plus, the heroes of Zamor were noted to have had an intense hatred of the Fire Giants, which could have carried over and created the basis for Radagon's own hatred of the Fire Giants. Maybe he never fought them at all. Or maybe he did fight against them, but his hatred could have still come from being at least partially made of a Zamor warrior. Which is my admittedly kind of goofy explanation for why Radagon has red hair and hates it. Because he knows the Fire Giants are enemies of the Golden Order, which he now loves and has made his whole identity. He probably resented Marika for creating him with red hair in the first place, especially since red hair in general would go on to being a sign of greatness or a sign of a great hero or warrior, with people like Radagon super proud of having a mane of red hair because of its heroic implications. I can't imagine Radagon was very fond of that, you know what I mean? So yeah, long story short, I believe Radagon was made using pieces of the Flame of Ruin and, of course, a very solid mimic tier. All created by Marika using Nox science. Maybe it's originally Newman science for all we know. Maybe the Nox and therefore the Carians who learned from the Nox all learned from the Newman, who were supposedly just interlopers from another world. I also think that the Nox at some point did in fact try to use a piece of a fallen god in their experiments to create a lord, but because the god was dead, in this case whatever the Finger Slayer blade used to be, that their experiment just ultimately didn't work. Now my headcanon has always been that the Finger Slayer blade was made of a piece of the One Great, which is probably not true. It's probably made of whatever the Death Bird Outer God once was. But if my headcanon was true, had they just waited a little longer for the Flame of Frenzy and therefore the One Great to be reborn into the vengeful demon fire that it was, maybe they would have been successful, although their new lord probably would have been obsessed with bringing chaos to the world. But as always, at least 3 times in the video, I'm getting off subject. Now let's get to why I believe Marika called Radagon back, or just came back if it was just her in disguise. As I said earlier, I tend to lean more that she did the seducing, but I also think it's very possible she sent her copy to go do it as like a test. And since mimic tiers have wills of their own, that's when he started, plotting. He had the best place ever to learn, the Carian royal court. But either conclusion doesn't really matter in this case. We know that he was called back so that Marika could create a couple more Empyreans. But if he's a science project, how the hell does she do that? Are science projects able to reproduce? Probably not. But actually they are, not in the way that we would think, but I'm pretty sure it's very possible that Marika could have taken portions of Radagon, the finished product, and then mixed those samples with pieces of other powerful beings, or maybe even gods, or deities, or spirits. In Mikla's case, I believe pieces of the, at least one of those ancestor spirits that forever slumbers but gains power through this slumbering, I believe pieces of that were used in Mikla's creation, amongst other things. Again, this is where my theory starts getting extremely loose and probably can be poked full of holes, but we're still having fun, right guys? It's funny how bastardized the word theory has become. I imagine a while back they used to be like a science-only word, and now look, it's for fictional lore videos on YouTube by a novice potion brewer like myself. Now, in the case of Melina, I believe she was born with the rot inside her because Marika was trying to use pieces of maybe that sealed away dead god. We do know at least one piece is still around, floating around in the Lake of Rot, which is coincidentally right beneath, I believe, Nox Stella. Interesting stuff. The piece that's down there could very well be the reason that that lake is a Lake of Rot. Now, perhaps Marika had a plan when she was doing all this creating of her new offspring. Like maybe the old rock god was super powerful and that's why she imbued one of the kids with it, because she knew that the one who was slumbering all the time, Mikula, was going to need a protector. I think at least by the time that, the twins were born, or the second set of twins in this case, that she was definitely already planning to cause the shattering in some way. We know she was at least somewhat involved with Ranni's plot, and by extension the Knight of Black Knives that left a bunch of her bastards dead, and one of her favorite kids, Godwin, which I can't really discern whether or not that was part of the plan, because again, there's just enough information missing to where we don't have the story in any way. It could be, any of these number of options. Or maybe I just suck at interpreting stuff. Maybe you guys know the right answer. I don't know, I learn a lot in the comments. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. On a completely unrelated note, though, I want to say that Mog and Morgott were probably, completely normal births, obviously, except for the fact that they're Omen. In fact, the only reason they probably were born Omen was look at their dad. He was like the living embodiment of the Crucible. He was essentially an animal in human form. The guy had to have a fucking Lion King grafted onto him just to calm him down. And presumably he was born and lived most of his life during the Crucible. It only makes sense that they would possess aspects, in their case horns and a tail, of the Crucible. So we've talked about, Mikula and Melina, but what about Melina? Well, I'm quite sure that she's also one of Marika's many experiments. I assume she was made using a sample of Radagon and pieces of whatever was left of the infamous Glowmide Queen, if in fact the Glowmide Queen isn't Marika. I know a lot of people seem to think that. I always like to view her as like this dark rival that Marika had when she was coming to power, but honestly, who knows? We do know, however, that she had a lot to do with the Rune of Death. Which reminds me of something that Melina herself says, that she's destined to walk alongside destined death as this kindling maiden. Now, I'm obviously, all my theories in this video are kind of loose, obviously. It's just a fun bit of speculating. But I do think that this is possible, right? Like, she could have been made with whatever remains or whatever was left of the original Glowmide Queen, similar to how I'm theorizing that Radagon was made from pieces of the Flame of Ruin, even though the Flame of Ruin isn't God. That would explain why these three are classified, or at least two, in this case. Melina isn't classified as a demigod, but Mikola and Melina are. Because they were technically made from a god, but not really, you know? They were made from a fake god who was made with bits and pieces of a real god. Again, this whole thing just gets very wacky, right? Like, now, arguably, I think that the biggest evidence that Radagon and Marika are two separate beings is that bit of dialogue that Melina relays to us, where it's supposedly in Marika's own words, "O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered both, mine other self." Now, this isn't the end-all, be-all, obviously. This could be interpreted in a number of ways. The Radagon persona very well could have been like some kind of infection from overexposure to the greater will, and it was quite literally maybe attempting to control her that way. That type of control could be what Ranni was referring to when she says, "I'm not going to let that thing control me." Where if you don't do what it wants, it quite literally starts taking you over and basically assimilating you. Definitely a possibility, but that quote is what got me thinking maybe he's a science project. I mean, there's a lot of homunculus stuff in the game. There's connections between the Nox and the Newman. But the question at the end of the day is why? Why would Marika need to do this? Why would she need to create a copy of herself, a figurehead, a false leader to be toppled? I mean, in a way, he makes the perfect decoy, right? Marika sets into motion the things that will lead up to the shattering, then causes the shattering, then basically tells all her demigod children, like, alright, well, you guys can attempt to become the new god, but if you guys fail, you'll amount to nothing more than just sacrifices. And I imagine this would spark a bunch of wars that would devastate the lands between. But that wasn't enough. She had also accounted for Godfrey and his followers, the Tarnished, to come back. You know, the former Elden Lord and his tribe of warriors who she sent off to go live and die in the wastelands, essentially keeping this trump card army in reserve until she absolutely needed it. I believe Radagon's ultimate purpose, or the purpose behind his creation, as intended by Marika, was to be the figurehead that gets toppled, to be the final endgame boss that gets killed. I also like to think that she planned to escape Leyndell. Like maybe she thought she'd be able to elude the Greater Will's agents or even Radagon himself, but was caught. Or maybe when she caused the shattering, she was instantly imprisoned in the Erd Tree, who knows. But I do like to think that she at least planned to escape. And I believe that place she planned to escape to was the Halig Tree. It was a hidden away, relatively well-protected, safe area that they could just hang out in while the demigods all killed each other or got killed by Godfrey. And shit, maybe if Marika had made it to the Halig Tree, Mog would have never been able to steal Mikola. But we see how things all played out, don't we? She also seemingly accounted for Ranni and her followers by having a group of Black Knife assassins on standby to take them out. At least that's what it seems, unless the Black Knife assassins are acting on their own nowadays. But at least Marika had somewhat accounted for the final revenge of the daughter of Rennala. They keep going back and forth over how bad the Lunar Queen got it out of all of this. I mean, does she really deserve that fate? I also think it's possible that Marika's decision behind sending her science project, or possibly going herself in disguise, had to be motivated by a curiosity as to how she was able to keep repelling Marika's armies. I mean, it's not like Marika knew that the moon was backing the Carians, or probably what the moon or moons even are, truly. She definitely seems to have some knowledge by the events of the game as she plotted with Ranni. It just, a lot of it all comes back to, we don't really know much about Radagon other than he made some changes to the Carian royal family's way they did things. He made the preceptors wear masks, specifically like constricting ones. This was supposedly done to make it clear that all of their matters were to be kept strictly private, since preceptors were the magical specialists that served the Carian family directly. And these guys were literal badasses who served as retainers in the Carian royal family prior to this, where they were likely given a lot more freedom. Now they were basically charged with making sure no one trespassed in the Carian study and shit like that. It's not necessarily hard to believe why Seluvis would be so willing to turn on the Carians, or at the very least to scheme under their noses. He saw the Lunar Queen crumble from within. He saw how Radagon reduced their once great house into little more than a subservient branch of nobility, whose only purpose was to act as pawns for the Golden Order like everybody else. Which was especially crushing because of how long that Carians and Raya Lucaria managed to maintain their independence from the Golden Order. Again, it's not hard to see why the Academy and the Academy Lords all turned against her. I imagine there was even a good number of Carians that weren't willing to fight for her, but they were willing to fight for Carian dominance, and there was a loyalty to their household and their name, which I really appreciated. At least that's how it comes off to me. Maybe I'm misinterpreting. You guys can let me know in the comments. I mean, from their perspective, here comes this guy that they beat in war twice, but because the queen wants to marry him and have some kids, he's allowed to make all kinds of changes that inevitably leads to the Carian royal family being perceived as weak, or at the very least, overthrowable. Because at the end of the day, yeah, Marika probably still would have kept sending armies over there, and Ronaldo would have kept repelling them. Maybe they would have signed some, ceasefire at some point, but that would have just kept going on. And I think many Carians, and even many of the Academy Lords and people who ruled the Raya Lucarian magical school, would all have preferred it that way. They didn't mind fighting if it was a common enemy. It's not like it mattered in the end, though. Once Radagon left, they saw Ronaldo for as weak as she truly was. I mean, she literally got manipulated into giving over her kingdom to Radagon, basically, who then had some kids with her, and one specifically an Empyrean who might change everything, and then he's recalled back to Marika to create a couple more. And since I imagine everybody knew this, it wasn't hard to round up all the Lake Lords to go to war against the Carians. It's safe to say that Marika enjoys at least a moderate degree of trolling. She, or her science project, basically destabilized Liurnia to the point where it'll never be a threat to the Erdtree or any of the possible orders that could potentially follow it, while also learning all of their secrets in the process. Again, it's downright comical how salty Marika was about being beaten at war by what I'm sure she considered to be a bunch of up-jumped astrologers playing it being monarchs. And to me, it's stuff like this that makes the Carians the coolest faction in the game. Now, there's very little evidence of it, but I personally believe Marika was going to attempt to help Mikola. I think that's who she was backing as the true new leader of the next order or whatever, you know what I mean? Like the next eternal being that will usher in the new world logic that wasn't the Erdtree. It was going to be his Halig tree. Now, again, there's not much evidence backing that Marika helped him or was going to help him before she was inadvertently imprisoned in the Erdtree with Radagon. But I like to think that the presence of a bunch of Black Knife assassins guarding the only way to access the Halig tree is a bit telling. As far as I know, we don't have any reason to believe that the Black Knife assassins don't serve Marika. I mean, we know they don't seem to serve the Golden Order, and they also don't seem to serve Ranni. I guess it's also possible that they serve no one. But that would be really fucking dumb, wouldn't it? I think that most evidence seems to point to some relationship between Marika and the Black Knife assassins. Maybe they're people who used to serve her and got tired of her and are now against her. That doesn't really make sense as to why they'd be protecting the Halig tree, though. Or maybe they all splintered off into different groups with their own individual ideals, morals, and codes. Or maybe they just offer their services to the highest bidder now. I mean, it can be interpreted a number of ways. They're all found in a lot of different places. Some of them seemingly act as crypt guardians even, so who even knows, although that one I believe was wounded. I do think it's safe to assume that at the very least Marika intended for Mikola to survive the shattering, since he was tucked away safely out past the consecrated snowfield at the Halig tree, while using his much more warlike sister to fight the war for him. Marika probably definitely viewed Melina as expendable, but a very useful expendable. I think maybe that's the whole reason she could have made Melina, is that she wanted to have a walking WMD she could use, or maybe she just thought it would be amusing. I don't know, this video kind of came out like a bit of a rambling mess, but I think the channel was overdue for one of those. I find it, relaxing to just wildly speculate sometimes. I mean, I guess that's pretty much how the whole Radagon shit started, just spiraling. And again, at the end of the day, there's not a whole lot of connections or evidence that he's a science project, but this video was a really fun thing to record. I'm going to try and do a more structured one, mainly focused around Marika's plot soon at some point. It'll definitely be done before the DLC comes out, since the DLC hasn't even been announced yet. Well, its date, I mean. The DLC has, but not the release date. You guys know what I mean. But it's definitely going to be done before the DLC, I can promise that. It's just not super high on the list anymore. Again, apologies if this video was a little too rambly. Since it was so crackpot, I just felt like that was the best way to frame it. But as always, I hope you guys liked the video and found it informative. If you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me rant on and on about various different games now, I'm going to start branching off more now, then please consider subscribing. As always, we got a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe soon, but I don't really want to say what's next because I never really get it right. I'll say one thing's next, and that one thing might not come out for like a week or two. Instead, a different video after different video might come in next. You know what I mean? And who knows? The luck of the draw. Sometimes I just inadvertently stop working on a project I was working on for like a week and start up something else and finish that in like a day and a half. You know, it's just really weird how this YouTube shit works, honestly. I guess everybody has their own unique process though, right? One thing I really like about this theory is it adds a little bit more depth to Mog kidnapping Mikola. Not from Mog's perspective, but from Marika's. If indeed she was putting all her chips on Mikola to be the one who survived the conflicts that followed the shattering, it's pretty ironic that her true-born son Mog, who she shunned and stuck in the sewer, bypassed all of Mikola's defenses, kidnapped him, and is sort of using him for the same purpose, you know, to usher in this new dynasty. But I imagine this is not in the way that Marika wanted, if indeed she wanted this. Well, again, not this, but him to be the one who won. You guys know what I mean. Anyway, you guys have a good one. I will see you next time. Next video will be pretty soon. It might be Zelda. It might be Elden Ring. It might be Fallout. We'll have to see, right? But yeah, you guys have a good one. I'll see you next time.